Well, today we're going to explore the Pentacrest from its beginning until today. And this presentation evolved into almost 2 hours. Now wait before you get panicky. So I've shortened it considerably, but it still highlights all the main features. It should be about a half hour. What does the Pentacrest mean to you? The Penta of Pentacrest, of course, means 5. 5 buildings present in this 4-block area that borders downtown Iowa City. I imagine most of you have visited the old Capitol, including its gift shop and museums. Some of you have probably visited Bird Hall, Mammal Hall, or the Museum of Natural History, which are all in McBride Hall. Perhaps you've been to a show in McBride Auditorium. So here we have the Pentacrest with its 5 buildings. Well, for 135 years of its history, the Pentacrest did not have 5 buildings on it. And for the first 100 years plus, it did not have the moniker of the Pentacrest. Here's a photo showing there were 7 buildings when the Pentacrest name was adopted. The 2 strangers here would be to the north, and I'll describe them shortly. One right here that I'm encircling that was torn down in the 1940s, and this one to the far north, torn down in 1975. So if you arrived after that, you only have known it as the true Pentacrest. Over the years that buildings have been present on this area, there have been, by my count, 19 buildings. John Rigg is credited with the design of our old Capitol. He received the commission to design it in 1839, while he was supervising the construction of the Illinois state capitol. Rigg quit the Iowa project after 5 months, claiming that his design was not being followed. Look at the similarities between the 2 buildings. The cornerstone for our old capitol was laid on July 4th, 1840. Sylvanus Johnson, Iowa City's first brickmaker, fired and supplied about 60,000 soft bricks for the interior walls of the old Capitol. The 4 large columns on the east side of the building are wooden columns, known as Doric columns. The limestone that was used for the old Capitol came from 2 sources. One was the old public quarry, located along the bank to the west of the president's residence, which was a lesser quality stone. The other source was some 10 miles upstream, the state quarry, which contained a higher quality limestone. In 1841, the Capitol was not yet ready for the legislators who came to town, so as promised, Iowa City furnished them accommodations rent-free. Walter Butler erected a building at his own cost. And by the fall of 1842, the roof was on the old Capitol, and 4 rooms were ready for the Iowa Territory's 5th Legislative Assembly, which moved in on December 5th of 1842. Yet the old Capitol was far from complete, with work proceeding through the rest of the 1840s and even into the 1850s. Here is perhaps the earliest photo of Old Capitol, made in around 1853. The University of Iowa was founded in 1847 as the State University of Iowa. On February 25th, just 59 days after Iowa was admitted to the Union, but instruction was not offered until 8 years later, in March of 1855. The instruction was offered in the old Mechanics Academy, which stood on Iowa Avenue where Seashore Hall is today. Why wasn't instruction offered until 1855? Well, reasons given are the arguing over whether Iowa City should be the only site for all divisions of the university. The legislature finally approved branches in Fairfield and Dubuque, and normal schools, that is teacher training schools, in Andrew, Oskaloosa, and Mount Pleasant. But the legislature did not grant any funds. In 1857, the new state constitution declared that the university was to be in one place only. And another reason for the delay was lack of money. When classes did begin, the university rented the Mechanics Academy. After the state government was moved to Des Moines in 1857, the old Capitol building, still unfinished, was immediately transferred to the university. A library and a museum of natural history were established on the second floor. And until about 1863, the old Capitol housed the entire university, providing space for offices and classrooms, a chapel, an armory, even a fire station. When the university found it needed more space, the legislature appropriated funds for a building just south of Old Capitol. The legislature released funds for its completion slowly, delaying its opening, and it was named South Hall. South Hall was built as a dormitory, lasting as such until 1866, not very long. Later, it served also as a classroom building, housing the departments of English, languages, history, medicine, liberal arts, dentistry, and finally engineering. Here is a lithograph of Old Capitol and South Hall. As even more space was required for the growing university, another building was erected to the north of Old Capitol, and appropriately called North Hall. Here is an 1866 image of North Hall the year it was built. The state press of Iowa City called it, quote, "the most barn-like public structure we ever saw. It looks like a cross between a dog kennel and a country church." Here's a photograph of the Pentacrest from about 1869, showing the three buildings and the iron fence that was put around the grounds in about the mid-1860s to keep out hogs and other livestock, which weren't forbidden in Iowa City at that time. In 1880, an armory was constructed west of the old Capitol. Later, it served as a boiler house, a gymnasium, a science laboratory, a carpenter shop, and finally the Hall of Engineering. Here's an 1880s view of the armory down below. In 1892, Old Capitol was referred to as Central Building. I believe the armory was demolished in 1923. In 1882, a large medical building was constructed south of South Hall. It would be right up by Washington Street. Here is a view of it from the southwest, and you can see South Hall to the left with its many chimneys. In the Board of Regents meeting minutes of 1884, I found the construction of a water closet being approved. The WC was located just south of the armory. Here is an image of it. Later, it was converted to a carpenter shop, and the demolition date could not be found, but probably was before 1912. Another building, a weights and measures building, and a cannon house were erected on the Pentacrest. I could not find build dates. Here's a photo of the weights and measures building. In 1884, the science building was built on the northeast corner of the Pentacrest. You will recognize it in a moment, and it now has a different name. Here's a photo. In 1891, an observatory was established on the north side of the Pentacrest. And here it is in an early 1900s view, with the west wings of the old dental building that would soon follow to the left. Here's a picture of a horse and buggy barn with yet another building nearby on the right. And here in 1895, a building intended only for dental instruction was constructed at the north end of the Pentacrest. Many years later, the building would become known as Old Dental. Here's a view of Old Dental from the Jefferson Street side. And if you were here before 1975, you may have seen it. In the 1890s, the University Library was housed in North Hall. And on June 19th of 1897, lightning struck North Hall, resulting in a fire that gutted the building and destroyed 25,000 of its books. As the firemen fought the blaze, there was little they could do. The water pressure was low. And during this fire, the Iowa City Fire Department lost its first firefighter, Lycurgus Leak. In spite of pleas for the state to fund the construction of a fireproof building, North Hall was not demolished, but repaired, and the building was once again established there. The library was. It wasn't until 1941 that the legislature finally funded a new library building, and the building was completed in 1951, which is our main library now on Madison Street. From this 1899 map, we see another structure on the Pentacrest, and it's labeled Ice House. I have it circled in red here. A fire broke out in the medical building in the wee hours of March 10th of 1901. It was discovered about 2:45 a.m., which was bad. The Iowa State Press said, in such a fire, flames shot upward for fully 200 feet. And worse yet, Irving Weber said the fire was fanned by strong gale-like winds, and to add further insult to injury, it occurred during a severe ice and sleet storm. South Hall was also destroyed in the fire that easily jumped the relatively small gap between the buildings. According to Irving Weber, the fire left the medical college homeless, and the entire 1,200-volume medical library was a total loss. After the medical building and South Hall burned, two temporary buildings were put in place. One of them was a building that became known as the engineering shed, or the sheep shed. It was constructed over the foundation of South Hall, shown here in green. Here is a view of the engineering shed from the north. And you'll see another building behind it on the far right. And that would be the temporary medical building that was put up in 1901 after the fire. The temporary medical building used the foundation of the burned out medical building. This is University of Iowa President Charles Schaefer, who was in office from 1887 to 1898. It was he who had a vision for buildings to surround the old Capitol. He never saw his plan come to fruition, however, because he died suddenly while in office at the age of 55. But Schaefer got the ball rolling by bringing in a Henry Van Brunt, who was one of the architects of the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. When George McLean became president, following Schaefer's sudden death, McLean vowed to continue with the program to erect a quartet of monumental buildings around the old Capitol. Proudfoot and Bird of Des Moines was chosen as the architects. This firm had established itself with such designs as the City Hall building in Wichita, Kansas, built in 1892. Proudfoot and Bird submitted a plan for a building in the Beaux-Arts classic design. It was one of 22 firms that submitted proposals, but Van Brunt chose them. The building was first called the Hall of Liberal Arts before being renamed Schaefer Hall in 1934. Here is the completed building as seen today, and Schaefer Hall is the oldest building in the university that is still using it for instruction, for classrooms. Here's an interesting view, 1903 view of the southwest corner of the Pentacrest. So we're looking up Clinton Street, you see it with bricks surfacing, and the intersection of Washington Street, and look at that tremendous stand of large elm trees. And as you might remember, we had a Dutch elm disease that came through the country and wiped out most of the elm population. Well, if the quartet of buildings that President McLean was to carry forward with was to become a reality, Science Hall would have to be demolished. I wonder if any of you recognize Science Hall yet. It was only about 20 years old at this time in 1905. There was an outcry from some when talk of razing ensued. So instead of razing it, a plan was made to move the building. The plan would call for moving the building approximately 150 feet, turning it 180 degrees, and placing it on a site a little to the west and a little to the north. The building that we all know, later renamed Calvin Hall, is the gorgeous red brick building seen here today. I think it's one of the prettiest buildings on campus. To move it, a series of 6-inch rollers were used, along with jacks and turning jack screws. The moving took about 4 months. During the move, classes were held in the building continuously. Usually the building would move about 3 feet per day. The longest one-day move apparently was 17 feet. Next, a new science hall would be constructed in the vicinity of the old one. Here we see the laying of the cornerstone in 1904. It would be the new Natural Science Building. The Hall of Natural Science was designed again by the firm of Proudfoot and Bird. And in fact, they designed all 4 of the Pentacrest buildings that would surround the old Capitol. The Hall of Natural Science houses the largest classroom on campus, as well as the Museum of Natural History, which is the oldest existing university museum west of the Mississippi. McBride Hall resembles Schaefer Hall, but there are significant variations to, quote, prevent the uniformity of the Pentacrest from becoming tiresome. Lots of birds and animals adorn the outside of the building. The Hall of Natural Science opened in 1908. It was later named for Thomas McBride, president of the university from 1914 to 1916. The next of the quartet of buildings was the Physics Building. Here we see the ceremony for the laying of the cornerstone in 1908. The building was first occupied in the fall of 1912. The sheep shed building that I talked about can be seen right behind there. The Physics Building later became McLean Hall, but not until 1969. It was, of course, named for President George McLean, who was president during its construction. Here's a view during the construction of the Physics Building. During excavation for the building, a cistern filled with human bones was uncovered. The discovery was immediately reported to President McLean. According to the account that I read, McLean determined that the bones were discarded from the anatomy laboratory in South Hall, and he arranged for their secret removal under the cover of darkness. Apparently, McLean enjoyed recounting the incident and always ended his story with, quote, and that was the only order I gave during my administration, which was not countermanded by the State Board of Education. Notice that I said State Board of Education. Earlier, it was called the Board of Regents, and of course later, the name again became the Board of Regents. An observatory was placed on top of the Physics Building and was in this building during the 1950s that James Van Allen and his team developed space mission science payloads before the department was moved to Van Allen Hall in 1964. In 1917 or 1918, after dentistry moved out of Old Dental on the Pentacrest and into what is now Trowbridge Hall, the University Elementary School moved into Old Dental. The elementary school within the College of Education was part of what was known as the University Schools, the experimental schools, or the University Laboratory Schools. The elementary school began in September of 1915 during President Walter Jessup's administration and allowed for Dr. Ernest Horn to begin his work in this realm. We know the Ernest Horn name from our elementary school on Benton Street. The University High School, commonly referred to as U-High, was also within the College of Education, and it began operation in 1916 for grades 9 through 12. In 1917, grades 7 and 8 were added. These schools were to operate for nearly 60 years. Advantages cited for children attending these schools included greater autonomy in curriculum design, advanced training in science, art, and music, and direct access to resources such as university libraries. I know many people who went to U-High. The high school was intended for teacher training from the outset and also was designed to explore new methods of teaching. Over time, the elementary school also expanded to include teacher training. In 1920 and beyond, the president of the university had his office there. I think I misspoke. I mean that his office was in the old Capitol, and I was just talking about Old Dental. Sorry. Now, the restoration of the old Capitol. After about the year 1900, many newspapers, alumni publications, and Board of Trustees minutes recorded the need to preserve Old Capitol and a need for repair and fireproofing. So in 1917, the legislature approved a $50,000 appropriation for restoring, fireproofing, and remodeling the former Capitol. However, the involvement of the U.S. in World War I delayed the beginning until 1921. The project took place between 1921 and 1924. And one of the first problems encountered was the settling of the structure. The original foundation extended only 5 feet below ground level, and the weight of the heavy limestone resting on this shallow footing had caused settling with the development of large cracks in the walls. A nearly total renovation took place. During this time, the west portico was added. The west portico was part of the original design, but it had not been built. And here is a 1921 photo showing the west side before the west portico was added. Some wooden beams were replaced with steel beams. All of the plastering was removed during the renovation. Millwork around the doors and windows was completely removed and replaced. I put this image in the year 1924 because that is the year University Hall, later Jessup Hall, opened, but it's a 1922 image during its construction. Note the extensive use of horses at that time. There's Old Dental that we see in the background, and this would be North Hall right here on the right. Old Dental's clinical wings, the west wings, had to be removed during the process of building Jessup. This is Walter Jessup, our president from 1916 to 1934. And here's the completed building. No, it's not. This is, I have gotten a little bit out of sync here when I was doing my revisions. Sorry about that. And I don't even have a label for this, but this is in 1924 during the construction of Jessup. You can see the crane or the tower that's going up here. This is a view of the completed Jessup Hall. Note the old street lamps. Probably it was taken in the 1920s. Now, University Hall, as it was known, originally housed the departments of Education, Commerce, and English. When the Department of English moved to the English Philosophy Building in 1970, President Willard Boyd transferred his office from the old Capitol into University Hall, where the office of the president has remained ever since. The north and south end facades present a more ornamental style than McLean Hall, so there's not complete symmetry between the two buildings, just as McBride and Schaefer are slightly different. Now, an article in the November 18 issue of the Iowa Alumnus announced that with the completion of the new University Hall, later Jessup, the 5 spot, as it was called, was finished and complete and occupied. The 5 spot. In the December 11th issue of the Daily Iowan in 1924, the 5 spot is called a weak name. The arguments for a new name began, suggesting that the new name, suggestions for it, be sent to the campus editor. In December of 1924, as promised, the Daily Iowan announced the winner of the contest by stating 5 Spot has passed out of existence, and hereafter the group will be known as the Pentacrest, a name adopted on the strength of the vote of a decided majority. So Pentacrest was named in 1924, and at the suggestion of an EAP, the name was chosen. Who was EAP? We find out much later. Here's the Pentacrest done in 1948. I began the program showing you North Hall and Old Dental still present there. In 1949, Old North Hall was demolished. Here we see the beginning of the process. So after this was demolished, the Pentacrest was down to having only 6 buildings. A letter dated June 27th of 1955 from a dentist named E.A. Plank. You remember the EAP? He was in practice in Independence, Iowa. He was sent to the office of the president, and he explained, Dr. Plank explained in reference to the naming contest for the Pentacrest that, quote, I thought that a name associated with the old world, which had contributed so much to our study of the arts, would be most appropriate. And I thought of Pentacrest, unquote. He said it was a combination word meaning 5 on a place of prominence. So he wrote the name on the board, and with some humility, he only placed his initials instead of his full name. In 1958, a plan, or scheme, I should say, was unveiled. The plan called for the construction of another North Hall and another South Hall, with each connecting 2 of the 4 major Pentacrest buildings, as shown in the diagram on the lower right here. Here we see a North Hall and a South Hall. If carried out, this would not destroy the symmetry of the Pentacrest, but it would block views of the old Capitol from both the north and the south, and give the Pentacrest an entirely new look, unwanted by many. The plan, fortunately, was not adopted. In July of 1970, an official announcement was made that Old Capitol would be restored. President Boyd and others then moved their offices to Jessup Hall. Margaret Keyes led a team which painstakingly carried out the work of research and gathered original, or at least original-like furnishings for the building. The building was stripped to its bare walls, and all the wood flooring was removed. The Restoration Committee wanted to make it look like it did from 1842 to 1857. Air conditioning and an elevator were installed. Also, many persons donated their labor to the project. Individual rooms were restored to different periods in an effort to provide a visual representation of the total history of the building. After an approximately 6-year restoration period, Old Capitol was reopened in 1976. Now, referring to Old Dental, one official said, quote, by 1975, time had caught up with the aging structure, which by then was rife with safety hazards. By then it was 80 years old. In October of 1975, Old Dental, which sat very close to the south sidewalk on Jefferson Street, succumbed to the Wreckers Ball. With this last old building removed, the Pentacrest was now truly a Pentacrest, with the symmetry that President Schaefer probably dreamed of. On November 20th, 2001, a fire broke out in the old Capitol Dome, with the fire getting out of hand in no time. The Iowa City Fire Department poured about 50,000 gallons of water on the fire, which resulted in the ruination of most of the walls and floors of the building. It took 14 months for the building to dry out, and holes had to be drilled in the columns and at the base of some of the walls in order to drain some of the water. The fire destroyed the dome, the cupola, and the bell tower. Concrete slab that was installed during the 1920s renovations saved the rest of the building from the spread of the fire. The damage was estimated at just under $6 million. It was later determined that workers started the fire when using open flame torches and heat guns to remove materials from the building during an exterior repair project. A three-phase $9 million project was undertaken to restore the old Capitol. Sprinklers hidden from view to ensure the historical look of the building were put in place. 2 galleries were added to the ground floor. The new wood dome was attached in February of 2003. It weighs 12,000 pounds and is covered with a very thin layer of 23 3/4 karat gold leaf. Remember, 24 karat gold leaf is pure gold. If all of the gold leaf were compacted, it would be about the size of a golf ball. Now moving into the 2010s. In late 2016, the university sued the contractor that it blamed for faulty construction work after the 2001 fire. The university said it discovered construction deficiencies in 2011. A claim was made that water leaked through the roof, causing the deterioration of wood siding and trim. So that might be considered the 4th restoration of the old Capitol. So, the Pentacrest today. The east and west buildings surrounding Old Capitol are not of exactly the same shape, but the general symmetry is still there, with the 2 east buildings pretty much matching each other, just as the 2 west buildings largely match each other. There are 2 rather large boulders that you may have noted in an earlier picture. They stand on the east grounds of the Pentacrest. They are commemorative glacial boulders that are gifts, one from the class of 1870 and the other from the class of 1880. Today, the grounds of the Pentacrest contain fewer trees than they once did. With respect to the existing trees on the Pentacrest, there are 2 trees of particular note. East of McBride Hall, a large black walnut tree stands. It is on record as the largest walnut tree in the entire state. The other tree of note is a large American elm, which stands to the east of Schaefer Hall. What is significant about it is the fact that it has survived the Dutch elm disease devastation of the 1960s. In the 1960s, 100 dead elms were removed from the Pentacrest. The big elm is over 110 feet tall and has a trunk of almost 15 feet in circumference. A recognition display from the Iowa Endowment of 2000, begun in 1985, is embedded on the west grounds of the Pentacrest. It's largely unseen when you drive by. And we have 2 museums contained within buildings on the Pentacrest. In McBride Hall, we have the University of Iowa Museum of Natural History. And the other museum is the Old Capitol Museum. So to summarize, there have been some 19 structures that have graced this 4-block area that was included in the founding of Iowa City. To quote an unknown source, the area has been called alternately the Old Capitol Campus, University Square, the Central Campus, the Pentagon, and the 5 Spot. It was not until the 1924 through 1925 academic year that the name Pentacrest was officially adopted. And thank you.